After being kicked out of home, she finds an old cabin. But a secret there changes everything. Chloe clutched her black backpack tightly against her chest as she walked along the country road, feeling the weight of the decision that had changed her life forever. The sun was beginning to hide behind the distant mountains, and her small legs were already trembling with exhaustion after hours of aimless walking. It had all started that terrible morning when her stepmother Martha finally lost her patience. The woman had been shouting for weeks that she couldn't stand having to care for a child who wasn't even her own daughter, especially after her own husband had left months ago, leaving only debts and empty promises. The last straw was when Chloe accidentally knocked over Martha's favorite plant pot, the only keepsake she had from her own mother. "Enough, Chloe! I can't stand you in this house anymore!" Martha had screamed, her eyes red with anger. "Take your things and get out of my sight. Go find your father or any relative who will put up with you, because I can't anymore." The 10-year-old girl had tried to explain that the accident had been unintentional, that she was only trying to help water the plants as she always did, but Martha didn't want to hear excuses. In less than an hour, Chloe was on the street with only her old school backpack, a few clothes, and the few dollars she had managed to gather from her broken piggy bank. Now, as she walked along that deserted road, Chloe felt a lump in her throat that she couldn't swallow. She had nowhere to go. Her biological father had disappeared when she was only 5, and she didn't know any other relatives. The few friends she had at elementary school lived too far away, and she knew their families wouldn't be able to care for another child. The cold afternoon wind made her skinny legs tremble under the simple little dress she wore. The backpack grew heavier on her back, and she had to stop every few meters to rest. It was during one of these stops that she spotted something on the horizon that made her heart race. In the middle of a field covered with tall weeds, there was a small wooden cabin. The walls were peeling and the roof had some missing shingles, but to Chloe at that moment it seemed the most beautiful thing in the world. Perhaps she could spend the night there, protected from the cold that was already beginning to bite. Leaving the main road, Chloe made her way through the tall vegetation, feeling thorns scratch her legs. With each step she took toward the cabin, her heart beat faster, mixing hope with fear of what she might find inside. When she finally reached the old worn wooden door, Chloe hesitated for a few moments. What if someone lived there? What if it was dangerous? But the cold that was beginning to bite and the weariness in her legs spoke louder than fear. Carefully she knocked on the door 3 times. "Is anyone there?" she asked with a trembling voice. There was no answer. Chloe waited a few more seconds and tried to turn the rusty doorknob. To her surprise, the door opened with a loud creak that echoed through the afternoon silence. The interior of the cabin was plunged in semi-darkness, but Chloe could make out the shapes of furniture covered in dusty sheets. The air was heavy and smelled of mold, as if no one had set foot there for a long time. Even so, being within 4 walls already made her feel safer. With careful steps, she entered the cabin completely and closed the door behind her. Her hands trembled as she fumbled along the walls, looking for a light switch, but found none. Apparently that place had no electricity. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Even in the darkness, Chloe managed to identify a small table near a window. She placed her backpack on it and began to explore the environment with more confidence. There were 2 wooden chairs, an old sofa covered with a yellowed sheet, and in the corner of the main room a small stone fireplace that hadn't been used in a long time. It was while examining the fireplace that Chloe felt something brush against her leg. Her first impulse was to scream in fright, but when she looked down, she saw a small, skinny, dirty, mixed-breed puppy looking up at her with big, frightened eyes. "Hey, little one," whispered Chloe, slowly crouching down so as not to scare the animal. "Are you all alone here too?" The puppy cautiously approached, sniffing the girl's outstretched hand. When she began to pet behind its ears, the little animal let out a sigh of contentment and leaned against her, as if it too were desperately in need of company. "You must be hungry, huh?" said Chloe, opening her backpack. "I have a sandwich here. Want to share it with me?" It was the last snack she had managed to prepare before leaving home, but she didn't hesitate to share half with her new companion. As the two ate in silence, Chloe wondered how that puppy had ended up there. Was it possible that it had also been abandoned? Night was falling quickly, and Chloe knew she needed to find a way to warm up. She decided to explore the cabin better to see if she could find blankets or something she could use. That's when she discovered a small door in the back leading to a tiny bedroom. Even in the dark, she managed to feel around and find a single bed with a mattress that, though old, seemed clean. There was also a small dresser and a wooden wardrobe. With the puppy following her steps, Chloe decided to check if there was anything useful in the furniture. To her surprise, when she opened the top drawer of the dresser, she found some children's clothes carefully folded. She picked up a wool sweater that seemed to be exactly her size. How was that possible? Who would have left children's clothes in an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere? Intrigued, Chloe continued searching the drawers. She found more pieces of clothing, all seemingly her size, as if someone had prepared that room especially for her. The discovery left her both hopeful and apprehensive. Could it just be a strange coincidence? In the wardrobe, she found clean blankets and even some children's books stacked on a shelf. Everything was very well kept for a supposedly abandoned house. Chloe began to suspect that maybe someone still took care of that place, even if they didn't live there permanently. With the puppy curled at her feet, Chloe wrapped herself in the blankets and tried to sleep on the small bed. But her mind wouldn't stop racing. Who owned this cabin? Why were there children's clothes there? And more importantly, was it safe to stay? During the night, she was awakened several times by strange noises. The wind made the cabin's wood creak, and sometimes it seemed like there were footsteps outside. The puppy also grew restless, sometimes perking up its ears as if hearing something she couldn't perceive. When the first ray of sunlight came through the dusty window, Chloe woke up determined to explore her surroundings better. Maybe she would find clues about who really owned that place, or perhaps she would discover a water source nearby, as her thirst was starting to bother her. Leaving the cabin with the puppy, she could see the property better in the daylight. Beyond the main house, there was a small shed in the back and what appeared to be an old well near a large tree. The property was much larger than she had imagined the night before. Walking to the well, Chloe was happy to discover there was still water. It wasn't very clean, but it would quench her thirst if necessary. It was as she was bending down to scoop some water with her hands that she heard a voice behind her. "Girl, what are you doing on my property?" Chloe turned quickly, spilling some of the water she had managed to gather. Before her stood an elderly man with white hair and an unshaven beard, wearing simple work clothes. His eyes were kind, but his expression showed surprise and some concern. I'm sorry, sir," Chloe stammered, holding the puppy against her chest. "I didn't know it had an owner. I was just looking for a place to sleep." The elderly man watched her in silence for a few moments, as if processing some important information. Chloe noticed his hands trembled slightly, and there was something in his eyes she couldn't identify. It was as if he recognized her. "How long have you been here, girl?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Since last night," Chloe answered honestly. "I didn't break anything, I swear. And if you want, I can leave right now." No need to leave," said the man, shaking his head slowly. "In fact, I was waiting for you." The statement left Chloe completely confused. What did he mean he was waiting for her? They had never seen each other before in their lives. Unless, did he know her father? Or maybe Martha had contacted someone. "Do you know me?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. The man took a few steps closer, and Chloe could see his eyes were moist. Something deeply emotional was happening, but she couldn't understand what. "My name is Thomas," he said gently, "and for a long time I've been hoping my granddaughter would come visit me." Chloe felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Granddaughter? Was this man saying he was her grandfather? But that was impossible. She had no grandparents, at least none that she knew of. Martha had always said she had no relatives besides her missing father. "You must be confused," said Chloe, shaking her head. "I don't have a grandfather. My father disappeared when I was little, and my mother died when I was born." "Was your mother's name Sarah?" asked Thomas, and his voice trembled as he spoke the name. Chloe's heart almost stopped beating. Yes, her mother's name was Sarah. Martha had told her that when she was younger, along with some other basic information about her parents. But how could this man know her mother's name? "How do you know that?" she asked, taking an instinctive step back. Thomas sighed deeply and gestured toward the cabin. "How about we go inside and talk properly? I have many things to tell you, Chloe." The fact that he knew her name left her even more astonished, but there was something in the man's voice and eyes that conveyed sincerity. Against all her self-preservation instincts, Chloe decided to trust him, at least temporarily. Back in the cabin, Thomas went straight to a drawer that Chloe hadn't touched the night before. From it, he pulled out an old dusty shoebox. His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing several old photographs. "Look at this," he said, handing a photo to Chloe. The image showed a young woman holding a baby. The woman had blonde hair and light eyes, exactly like Chloe, but what shocked her most was realizing that she and the woman in the photo were practically identical, just at different ages. "This is your mother, Sarah," said Thomas with a choked voice, "and the baby in her arms is you." Chloe held the photograph with trembling hands, trying to process what she was seeing. The resemblance was undeniable, but there were still so many unanswered questions. "If you're my grandpa, why did I never know you existed? Why did my mother never talk about you?" Thomas lowered his head, as if carrying an enormous weight on his shoulders. "Because I made the biggest mistake of my life," he whispered. "When your mother got pregnant at 17, I was furious. I said terrible things to her, things I should never have said. I threw her out of the house thinking I was doing the right thing." Tears began to roll down Thomas's face as he continued the story. "Sarah left home pregnant and never came back. I tried to look for her for years, but she had completely disappeared. I only found out she had died in childbirth a long time later, through acquaintances. And I didn't even know you existed until a few years ago." Chloe felt a mix of emotions she couldn't sort out: anger, sadness, confusion, and, surprisingly, a strange relief at discovering she had family. But there was still something that didn't make sense. "How did you know I would be here? How did you prepare the clothes in the room?" Thomas sighed again and showed another photograph. This time it was a recent picture of Chloe entering the elementary school, clearly taken from a distance. "I hired a private investigator to find you 2 years ago," he admitted. "When I discovered where you lived and with whom, I began following your life from afar. I saw how Martha treated you, especially after your stepfather disappeared." The revelation left Chloe stunned. Her own grandfather had been watching her life without her knowing. It was comforting to know someone cared about her, but also frightening to discover she had been watched. "The investigator told me the situation at home was becoming unbearable," continued Thomas. "I knew sooner or later Martha would throw you out. So I prepared this cabin, hoping you would eventually find your way here. But how were you so sure I would come here specifically?" "I wasn't sure," he admitted. "But this cabin is on the only country road that connects your old home to the neighboring towns. It was the most likely path you would take if you needed to leave on foot. And I came here every day to check if you had arrived." Chloe looked around the cabin with new eyes now. Every detail she had found the night before made sense. The clothes in her size, the food within its expiration date, even the children's books. Everything had been carefully prepared for her. "Are you really my grandpa?" she asked, still needing confirmation. Thomas took another photograph from the box. This time it showed him, much younger, next to a beautiful woman and a small blonde girl. "This is me with your grandmother Elizabeth and your mother Sarah when she was about your age," he said. "You look just like her at that age." The photographic proof was undeniable. The girl in the picture could easily have been Chloe, but there was still a part of her that resisted believing completely. She had been hurt and abandoned so many times that accepting this new reality seemed too risky. "Why didn't you try to get me before? Why did you wait until I was thrown out of the house?" The question cut deep into Thomas, who closed his eyes as if feeling physical pain. "Because I am a coward," he said simply. "I was afraid you would reject me, just like your mother did when she was young. I was afraid Martha wouldn't let you meet me. And I was afraid I wouldn't be a good grandpa after having been such a bad father." Chloe could see the sincerity and remorse in his eyes. It was hard to keep distrusting someone who showed so much vulnerability and regret. "Your grandmother Elizabeth died 5 years ago," continued Thomas. "Before she passed, she made me promise I would try to find you. She said our family had been separated by pride for long enough. That's when I hired the investigator." "And now?" asked Chloe, unable to hide the hope in her voice. "What happens to me now?" Thomas knelt in front of her, coming down to her eye level. "Now I would like to ask for a chance to be the grandfather I should have been from the start," he said firmly. "If you'll allow me, I'd like you to come live with me. I have a bigger house in the city, and you could continue studying at the elementary school in the area." The offer seemed too good to be true. Chloe had spent her whole life feeling unwanted anywhere, and now someone was offering not just a home, but a real family. "Are you sure?" she asked cautiously. "I can be a handful sometimes. Martha always said I was hard to put up with." "Martha was wrong," said Thomas firmly. "You are a smart and brave girl. Anyone would be lucky to have you as family." For the first time in a long while, Chloe felt tears of relief rolling down her face. The puppy, as if sensing the emotion of the moment, came closer and licked her tears. "Can the puppy come too?" she asked, holding the small animal. Thomas smiled, the first genuine smile Chloe had seen on his face. "Of course he can. Every family needs a dog." In the following days, Thomas took Chloe to see his house in the city. It was a simple but cozy building, with a large backyard where the puppy, now named Buddy, could run freely. There was a room he had prepared especially for her, with a new bed and some toys he imagined a girl her age would like. But the adjustment wasn't as easy as Chloe had imagined. After years of living in a hostile environment, it was hard to believe she was finally safe. She would wake up in the middle of the night thinking it was all just a dream, or that Thomas would change his mind and send her away. Thomas, for his part, was also facing his own challenges. He had spent years blaming himself for his daughter's death and the lost time with his granddaughter, and now he wasn't quite sure how to relate to a child. His attempts at affection sometimes seemed forced, and he constantly worried he was doing everything wrong. 1 week after Chloe moved into his house, the two had their first serious argument. Thomas had suggested she change schools to one closer to the new house, but Chloe flatly refused. Her previous school was one of the few positive constants in her life, and she didn't want to lose the few friends she had made there. "But it would be much easier if you studied here nearby," argued Thomas. "I'd have to make a very long trip every day to take you to and pick you up from your current school." "Then maybe it's better if I go back to Martha's house," replied Chloe, crossing her arms stubbornly. The words hit Thomas like a punch to the stomach. He realized his granddaughter still didn't feel completely safe there, and that any pressure could make her run away again. "I'm sorry," he said, bending down to her level. "You're right. If you want to stay at your school, then that's where you'll keep studying. I just want you to be happy." It was at that moment that Chloe began to realize Thomas was truly willing to put her well-being above his own convenience. It was something completely new in her experience, and she slowly began to lower her emotional defenses. As the weeks passed, grandfather and granddaughter found a rhythm that worked for both of them. Thomas discovered that Chloe liked to help in the kitchen and began teaching her recipes his own mother had taught him decades ago. Chloe, in turn, discovered that her grandfather had a natural talent for telling stories, especially about the family and what life was like when he was young. But not everything was settled. Chloe still had frequent nightmares about being abandoned again, and sometimes tested the limits of Thomas's patience, as if checking if he would really send her away if she misbehaved. Thomas, recognizing these signs, always remained calm and consistent, reaffirming his commitment to her. 3 months after Chloe had arrived at his home, Thomas received an unexpected call. It was Martha, who had discovered where the girl was living and demanded she return immediately. "I never said she could leave forever," Martha shouted over the phone. "I just wanted her to learn a lesson. Now I want my stepdaughter back." Thomas tried to explain that Chloe was well cared for and happy, but Martha wouldn't listen. She threatened to involve the authorities if he didn't return the girl immediately. When Thomas told Chloe about the call, the girl was terrified. The prospect of having to go back to that house was terrifying for her. "Please, Grandpa Thomas, don't send me back there," she begged, using the affectionate term for the first time. "I promise I'll be a good girl. I promise I won't be any trouble," "You are not going back there," said Thomas firmly. "I won't let that happen." But both knew the situation was complicated. Legally, Martha was still considered responsible for Chloe, as she had been married to the girl's father. If she really decided to involve the authorities, there wasn't much Thomas could do. It was then that Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He contacted a lawyer and began the process of seeking legal custody of Chloe. It was an expensive and lengthy procedure, but he was willing to make any necessary sacrifice. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. The legal process dragged on for months. During this period, Martha made several attempts to get Chloe back, including showing up at her elementary school to try to take her by force. Thomas had to take extreme measures, such as obtaining a temporary court order to keep Martha away from his granddaughter. The situation was taking a heavy toll on both of them. Chloe lived in a constant state of alert, fearing that at any moment she could be forced back to her previous life. Thomas, for his part, was spending all his savings on lawyers and feeling guilty for exposing his granddaughter to all that stress. It was during one of the court hearings that the truth about Martha's motivation finally came to light. Thomas's lawyer had investigated her financial situation and discovered something disturbing. Martha was receiving a government pension intended for Chloe's care, a benefit she had applied for claiming the child was an orphan and under her care. If she lost custody of Chloe, she would also lose this monthly source of income, which had become essential for maintaining her lifestyle. "So she never really cared about me?" asked Chloe when Thomas told her about the discovery. "It was only about the money." Thomas felt his heart break, seeing the pain in his granddaughter's eyes. "How do you explain to a child that some adults are capable of using other people just for their own benefit?" "What matters now is that you're with me," he said, hugging her. "And I love you for real, not for money or any other reason besides you being my granddaughter." The revelation about Martha's true intentions significantly strengthened Thomas's case in court. The judge was visibly outraged to learn that a child had been treated as a source of income and began seriously considering transferring custody to the biological grandfather. But Martha did not give up easily. She hired her own lawyer and began making serious allegations against Thomas, suggesting he was unfit to properly care for a 10-year-old child. She questioned his age, his financial situation, and even his mental sanity. The court ordered a series of psychological and social evaluations for both Thomas and Chloe. Social workers visited their home several times, interviewed neighbors, teachers, and anyone who could provide information about how the girl was being treated. To the relief of both, all evaluations were extremely positive. Chloe was clearly flourishing under her grandfather's care. Her grades in elementary school had improved significantly. She seemed more confident and happy, and had developed a genuine bond with Thomas. Neighbors testified that they often saw grandfather and granddaughter playing in the yard with Buddy, working together in the garden, or simply talking on the porch in the late afternoon. It was obvious to any observer that there was genuine love between them. Chloe's teachers also gave positive testimonies. They reported that the girl who previously often arrived at school hungry and in dirty clothes was now always well cared for and fed. Her classroom behavior had improved drastically, and she seemed to have found the emotional stability that allowed her to focus on her studies. Most importantly, when Chloe herself was interviewed by the judge, she made it clear she wanted to stay with her grandpa. With impressive maturity for her age, she explained that she felt loved and safe for the first time in her life. "My grandpa Thomas treats me like I'm special," she told the judge. "He makes tasty food for me, helps me with my homework, and never yells at me even when I do something wrong. He tells me stories about my mother and makes me feel like I'm part of a real family." The contrast with her previous life was stark. Several people testified about the conditions Chloe lived in with Martha, often without proper food, with clothes unsuitable for the weather, and always seeming fearful and withdrawn. Finally, after almost 6 months of legal battle, the judge made his decision. Permanent custody of Chloe was granted to Thomas, and Martha was ordered to return any money she had improperly received, claiming to care for the child. The day of the final decision was one of the most emotional in both their lives. Thomas cried openly when the judge announced his decision, and Chloe threw herself into his arms, finally allowing herself to believe she was truly safe. "Now it's official," said Thomas, holding her tightly. "You are my granddaughter forever, and no one can change that." In the months that followed, their life settled into a comfortable and happy routine. Thomas had learned to balance his need to protect Chloe with the importance of giving her space to grow and develop her independence. Chloe, in turn, had learned she could trust her grandfather's unconditional love. They developed their own family traditions. Every Sunday they visited the cabin where they first met, which Thomas kept clean and tidy as a kind of family sanctuary. Chloe liked to bring flowers to put in a little vase on the living room table, and they often had picnics on the land around the cabin. Their relationship also helped Thomas deal with the guilt he had carried for decades about what had happened to Sarah. Through Chloe, he could see that his daughter had been a special person who raised an extraordinary child, even in the difficult circumstances she lived in. Chloe, in turn, found through her grandfather a connection with the mother she had never known. Thomas shared memories of Sarah as a child, showed old photographs, and even taught his granddaughter some songs he used to sing to his daughter. In this way, Chloe was able to build a loving image of her mother that went far beyond the few negative pieces of information Martha had shared over the years. The dog Buddy also became an integral part of the family. Thomas, who had initially agreed to the animal just to please Chloe, discovered he very much enjoyed the dog's company. Buddy seemed to understand his role as Chloe's emotional guardian, always positioning himself near her when he sensed she was sad or worried. 1 year after moving in together, Thomas decided it was time to further formalize Chloe's situation. He began the legal procedures to officially adopt her, not just as a guardian, but as her legal father. It was a way to ensure she would have all the rights of a biological daughter, including inheritance and other legal benefits. Chloe was moved by the proposal. Although Thomas had always been her biological grandfather, the legal adoption would represent a new beginning for both of them, a way to officially leave behind all the traumas of the past and start a new life as a chosen family. The adoption ceremony was simple but emotional. Thomas had invited a few close neighbors and Chloe's favorite elementary school teachers to witness the moment. When the judge asked Chloe if she understood the meaning of the adoption and if she agreed to it, her answer was clear and firm. "Yes, I understand. It means that Grandpa Thomas is going to be officially my father now, and that nothing and no one can ever separate our family again." After the ceremony, they organized a small party at home. Chloe had helped Thomas prepare her favorite cake, a chocolate cake with strawberry frosting that they had perfected together over the months. It was a perfect symbol of the life they had built, sweet, made with love, and the result of both of their collaboration. During the party, one of the neighbors commented on how impressive it was to see the transformation that had happened in both Chloe and Thomas since they came together as a family. "Thomas, you look 10 years younger," said Mrs. Margaret, an elderly neighbor. "And Chloe, well, she doesn't even look like the same frightened child who arrived here over a year ago." It was true. Thomas had regained a sense of purpose and joy he hadn't felt since his wife's death. Taking care of Chloe had given new meaning to his life and helped him forgive himself for the mistakes of the past. Chloe, in turn, had blossomed from a withdrawn, insecure child into a confident and loving girl. But their story still held one final surprise. A few weeks after the adoption, Chloe was organizing her things in her room when she found an old letter at the bottom of one of the drawers. It was an envelope yellowed with time, with her name written on the front in a delicate handwriting she didn't recognize. Intrigued, she took the letter to Thomas. "Grandpa, look what I found. Do you know where this came from?" When Thomas saw the letter, his face paled. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from his late wife, Elizabeth. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It was at the bottom of my bedroom drawer under some old papers." Thomas opened the letter with trembling hands. It was a message that Elizabeth had written for Chloe years before she died, in the hope that one day she would find it. "My dear granddaughter Chloe," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means you have finally found your way to your grandfather, as I always knew would happen. I know I didn't have the chance to meet you in person, but I am sure you are a special girl just like your mother was." The letter went on to explain how Elizabeth had spent the last years of her life convincing Thomas to search for his granddaughter, and how she had made him promise that he would try to be the grandfather he should have been from the start. "Thomas is a good man," Elizabeth wrote. "He made mistakes with your mother when he was younger, but he learned from them and became a better person. He will love you with all his heart and will never let you feel alone again." The letter ended with a blessing. "May you both find in each other the family that heals all the wounds of the past, and may our family, finally reunited, be a source of joy and love for you both." Both Thomas and Chloe were crying when they finished reading the letter. It was as if Elizabeth was there with them, blessing the family they had built together. "Grandma Elizabeth was right about everything," said Chloe, hugging Thomas tightly. "She knew we were going to find each other and be happy together." The letter became a treasure for both of them, a confirmation that their union was not just a happy coincidence, but something that had been wished for and planned by someone who loved them deeply. 2 years after that first meeting in the abandoned cabin, Thomas and Chloe had built a life that neither of them could have imagined. The frightened, abandoned girl had transformed into a confident and loving teenager, and the man tormented by guilt had become a dedicated and happy father. They still visited the cabin regularly, not just as a place of nostalgia, but as a reminder of how life's paths can change in unexpected ways. The cabin had been restored by them over the months and had become a special family retreat, a place where they could go to talk, relax, and remember where it all began. Chloe, now 12 years old, had developed a special interest in gardening, inspired by the land around the cabin. She and Thomas had transformed that property into a small paradise, with flowers, fruit trees, and even a vegetable garden where they grew produce for their own consumption. The dog Buddy, now grown and strong, remained Chloe's faithful companion. He had become protective not only of her, but of the entire property, always alerting when visitors approached the cabin. Chloe's school life had also flourished. She had become one of the best students in her grade and had discovered a special talent for math and science. Her teachers often praised not only her academic performance, but also her kind personality and her willingness to help classmates who were struggling. Thomas, in turn, had found a new passion in carpentry. Inspired by the time he spent maintaining and improving the cabin, he began making small wooden furniture and objects. What started as a hobby turned into a modest source of extra income, and he discovered he had a natural talent for creating beautiful and functional pieces. The carpentry workshop he set up in the backyard became another point of connection between grandfather and granddaughter. Chloe enjoyed helping him with projects, and he was teaching her basic woodworking techniques. It was a way for them to spend quality time together while creating something useful and beautiful. On a Sunday afternoon, while working together on a new table for the cabin, Chloe asked a question Thomas didn't expect. "Grandpa, do you think my mom would be proud of me if she were here?" Thomas stopped what he was doing and looked at his granddaughter. At 12 years old, she was starting to look even more like Sarah, and sometimes he felt as if he were watching his daughter grow up all over again. "I'm absolutely certain she would be very proud," he said with conviction. "You've become an incredible young woman, smart, kind, and brave. Your mother would be overjoyed to see the person you've become." "Sometimes I feel like she is here with us," confessed Chloe, "especially when we're at the cabin or when you tell stories about her. It's like she's still part of our family." "And she is," confirmed Thomas. "Love doesn't disappear just because the person isn't physically with us anymore. Your mother lives on in you, in the stories we tell about her, and in the love we share as a family." This conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Chloe had finally fully processed the loss of the mother she never knew and found a healthy way to honor her memory. Thomas, in turn, had finally forgiven himself for the mistakes of the past and found peace with the family history. On the 3rd anniversary of their first meeting at the cabin, they decided to organize a special celebration. They invited some close friends and neighbors for a barbecue on the grounds around the cabin. It was a way to share their joy with the people who had supported their journey as a family. During the party, Mrs. Margaret, the neighbor who had followed their entire story, made an emotional toast. To Thomas and Chloe, who have shown us that family isn't just about blood, but about love, dedication, and second chances. May you continue to be an inspiration to all of us. The party was a success, but the most special moment was when everyone had left, and only Thomas, Chloe, and Buddy remained at the cabin. They sat on the small porch Thomas had built, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Grandpa, thank you for not giving up on looking for me," said Chloe, resting her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for giving me a second chance to be part of a family," replied Thomas, kissing the top of her head. Buddy stretched out at their feet, content and sleepy after a day full of playing with the visitors. The silence that settled between them wasn't uncomfortable, but rather the kind of silence that exists only between people who feel completely at ease with each other. As they watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky, both reflected on the extraordinary path that had led them to that moment. An abandoned cabin had become the setting for the most important meeting of their lives, the place where a lost child found a family and where a tormented man found redemption. The property that once represented abandonment and loneliness was now a symbol of renewal and hope. The walls that witnessed their first nervous encounter now held memories of laughter, deep conversations, and moments of pure family happiness. "You know something, Chloe," said Thomas, breaking the contemplative silence. "I used to think that past mistakes couldn't be fixed, but you taught me that there's always time to start over. There's always a second chance waiting for us. And you taught me that even when we feel completely alone, there's someone somewhere who cares about us," replied Chloe. "Sometimes we just need to be brave enough to keep walking until we find that person." This wisdom, coming from a 12-year-old girl, touched Thomas's heart deeply. He realized that Chloe was not just a child in his care, but also his teacher in many important lessons about forgiveness, hope, and the human capacity to reinvent oneself. In the years that followed, the story of Thomas and Chloe became known in the small community where they lived, not as a curiosity or gossip, but as a source of inspiration for other families facing their own difficulties. Several times, social workers from the region brought children in difficult situations to meet their family, hoping their story could offer hope and guidance. Thomas and Chloe always welcomed these visits with open arms, sharing their experience and offering practical support when possible. On one such occasion, an 8-year-old girl named Lily was brought to meet them. She had been abandoned by her family and was having trouble adjusting to the temporary shelter where she lived. The child was withdrawn and distrustful, exactly as Chloe had been at the beginning. "Why are you happy now?" Lily asked directly, with the brutal honesty that only children possess. Chloe, now 14, knelt down to be at eye level with the younger girl. "Because we decided to give each other a chance," she explained gently. "At first I was very scared, just like you are now. But sometimes when we're brave, we find that there are good people in the world who want to take care of us." "And what if it doesn't work?" asked Lily, echoing the fears Chloe had felt years before. "Then you keep trying until it does," replied Thomas, joining the conversation. "The important thing is to never give up hope of finding your family, even if it's different from what you imagined." Lily's visit marked the beginning of a new phase in their lives. Thomas and Chloe began to get more actively involved with the local shelter system, offering mentorship and support to children in situations similar to what Chloe had faced. They couldn't adopt all the children who needed help, but they could offer something equally valuable: living proof that happy endings exist, that families can be formed in unconventional ways, and that true love can overcome any past trauma. The cabin where it all began became a meeting point for these informal gatherings with children and families in distress. The rural and peaceful environment helped people open up and share their stories, and often important connections were formed at these meetings. At one such gathering, Thomas met Arthur, a 60-year-old widower who was struggling to care alone for his 2 teenage grandchildren after his daughter had died in an accident. The man was overwhelmed and considering giving custody of the children to social services, thinking he couldn't provide what they needed. "I don't know how to do this," Arthur confessed to Thomas during a conversation on the cabin porch. "They need so many things I don't know how to give. They're teenagers. They have needs I don't understand." Thomas recognized in the man's desperation the same feelings he had experienced when Chloe came into his life. "You know, Arthur, I also thought I didn't know how to be a grandpa," he shared. "But I learned it's not about knowing everything. It's about being willing to learn with them, to make mistakes and try again, to show them that you won't give up even when things get tough." The conversation marked the beginning of a friendship between the two men, and Thomas became a sort of mentor to Arthur. They met regularly to exchange experiences, and Arthur gradually gained confidence in his ability to raise his grandchildren. Chloe also developed a friendship with Arthur's grandchildren, 15-year-old James and 13-year-old Grace. They often visited the cabin property together, and Chloe shared with them the lessons she had learned about building a non-traditional family. "The secret," she explained to Grace during one of their conversations, "is not being afraid to be vulnerable. When you show your family that you also have fears and difficulties, it becomes easier for everyone to help each other." These friendships further enriched the lives of Chloe and Thomas. They realized that their personal experience had transformed into something bigger, a capacity to help other people navigate complex family situations. When Chloe turned 15, she surprised Thomas with an unexpected proposal. "Grandpa, I want to do something official to help other kids like me, like a project or a small organization. What do you think?" The idea touched Thomas deeply. Seeing his granddaughter transform her own painful experience into a strength to help others was one of the proudest moments of his life. Together, they began planning a project they called Heartfelt Families. The idea was to create a space where children in vulnerable situations could meet with adults willing to form alternative family bonds, not necessarily through formal adoption, but through relationships of mentorship, support, and genuine care. The cabin became the unofficial headquarters of the project. They organized monthly meetings where stories were shared, friendships were formed, and creative solutions to family problems were developed collectively. The project grew organically. Families from the region began volunteering, offering everything from help with elementary school homework to emotional support for children going through difficult times. It wasn't formalized or bureaucratic, just good people deciding to care for one another. Dr. Robert, a retired pediatrician who had learned their story through mutual acquaintances, offered to provide free consultations for the children involved in the project. Mrs. Susan, a retired teacher, began giving free tutoring lessons. Mr. Richard, a local mechanic, offered his services to keep the family's cars in good condition. It was a practical demonstration of how a community can come together to care for its most vulnerable members, inspired by the story of love and perseverance of a grandfather and his granddaughter. On the 5th anniversary of their meeting at the cabin, Thomas and Chloe organized a larger party to celebrate not only their own journey, but also all the families that had formed or been strengthened through the Heartfelt Families project. More than 50 people attended the celebration. There were children who had found loving homes, adults who had discovered the joy of being mentors, and entire families that had been transformed by the experience of caring for one another. During the party, Lily, the shy girl who had visited years before, approached Chloe with a big smile on her face. "Chloe, I wanted to tell you something," she said, now 12 years old and visibly more confident. "Do you remember when you told me not to give up hope?" "Of course I remember," replied Chloe, smiling. "Well, I found my heartfelt family. Dr. Robert and his wife adopted me last month, and it all started when they came to those meetings at the cabin." The news filled Chloe with joy. Seeing that her own story had inspired other children not to give up hope was more rewarding than any personal achievement could be. As the party continued around them, Thomas and Chloe found themselves once again sitting on the cabin porch, watching all the life and joy that had developed in a place where once there was only abandonment and loneliness. "Did you know this would happen when you first found me here?" asked Chloe. "I hoped we could be happy together," Thomas answered honestly. "But I never imagined our story would become something capable of helping so many other people." "I think that's how it works when love is true," reflected Chloe, with a wisdom that impressed Thomas. "It doesn't stay just between two people. It spreads and touches other lives too." As the sun began to set and guests started to say their goodbyes, many approached Thomas and Chloe to thank them personally for the impact they had on their lives. "You showed us that family doesn't have just one shape," said Arthur, now much more confident in his role as guardian to his grandchildren, and that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose to build. "Thank you for teaching me that being broken doesn't mean being beyond repair," added Grace, Arthur's granddaughter, who had become one of Chloe's best friends. Each thank you was a confirmation that the decision to transform their personal pain into a force for good had been the right choice. They had discovered that the deepest healing comes when we can use our own wounds to help heal others. That night, after everyone had left and they were cleaning up the remains of the party, Chloe made an observation that would be etched in Thomas's memory forever. "You know, Grandpa, I used to think the most important part of our story was when we found each other, but now I think the most important part is what we did after we found each other." Thomas stopped gathering plates and looked at his granddaughter with admiration. "Explain that better," he requested. "Well, many people get second chances, but not everyone does something good with them," explained Chloe. "We could have just been happy that we found each other and left it at that, but we decided to use our happiness to help others find theirs too. I think that's what made our story truly special." Chloe's reflection struck Thomas's heart in a profound way. He realized his granddaughter had articulated something he felt but couldn't express, the responsibility that comes with personal healing to use that experience for the benefit of others. In the months following that memorable party, the Heartfelt Families Project continued to grow and evolve. They began keeping more organized records of successful matches between children and families and developing some basic guidelines to ensure everyone's safety. Chloe, now 16, had become a natural leader of the project. She had a special talent for identifying the needs of the younger children and connecting them with adults who had the right qualities to meet those needs. Thomas, in turn, specialized in working with adults who were hesitant about taking on family responsibilities. His own experience of overcoming fear and guilt made him particularly effective in helping other men his age embrace caregiving roles. One of the most striking stories they witnessed was that of Mrs. Patricia, a 70-year-old woman who had lived alone since her husband's death. She had lost her only son in an accident years before and thought she would never have a family again. Patricia began attending the gatherings just as a volunteer, helping with meal preparation and cleaning. But gradually she developed a special bond with Toby, a 9-year-old boy who had been abandoned by his parents and had been living in a shelter for over a year. Toby was a difficult child. He had behavioral issues, struggled in elementary school, and deeply distrusted adults. But something about Mrs. Patricia's persistent kindness intrigued him. Perhaps it was the fact that she didn't try to force a connection, or maybe it was simply the caring way she made sandwiches for everyone at the end of the meetings. "Mrs. Patricia makes the best cheese sandwich in the world," Toby commented to Chloe during one of the meetings. "And she always saves the last one for me." Chloe realized she was witnessing the beginning of something special. Over the following weeks, she observed how Toby began to seek out Mrs. Patricia whenever he arrived at the meetings, and how the elderly woman's eyes lit up every time she saw the boy. "Mrs. Patricia, can I ask you something?" said Chloe during a private conversation. "Have you ever thought about becoming a heartfelt grandparent for Toby?" The idea had clearly crossed the woman's mind, but she had many doubts. "Chloe, dear, I'm 70 years old. Do I have the energy to care for a child? What if I don't know how to handle his problems?" "You don't need to solve all his problems," Chloe explained gently. "Sometimes the most important thing we can give a child is just the certainty that someone cares about them. The rest we learn along the way." With the support of Thomas and Chloe, Mrs. Patricia began spending more time with Toby outside of the meetings. She took him out for lunch, helped him with school assignments, and gradually began to take on a grandmotherly role in his life. The transformation was remarkable for both of them. Toby became a much calmer and more focused child, and his behavioral problems at school practically disappeared. Mrs. Patricia, in turn, regained a sense of purpose and joy she hadn't felt in years. "It's funny," she commented to Thomas during one of the meetings. "I thought I was doing Toby a favor, but I think he's doing a bigger favor for me. He gave me a reason to wake up excited every morning." Eventually, Mrs. Patricia managed to become Toby's legal guardian. The ceremony was simple, held in the cabin itself with the entire project community present. When the court officer asked Toby if he understood what was happening, his answer was clear. Yes, I understand. It means now I have a real grandma, and she has a real grandson. And we're going to take care of each other. Stories like this repeated regularly through the project. Not all ended in formal adoptions, but all involved the creation of genuine and lasting bonds between people who needed each other. There was Mr. John, a retired farmer who became a mentor to 3 teenagers who were having trouble in school. There was teacher Martha, who opened her home every Saturday to a group of children who needed help with schoolwork. There were even entire families who informally adopted other families going through temporary difficulties. The project also attracted the attention of some people who worked professionally with at-risk children. Social workers in the region began referring more complicated cases to the meetings, knowing that even when formal solutions weren't possible, the children would benefit from the community's emotional support. Dr. Jennifer, a child psychologist, began regularly attending the meetings as a volunteer. She offered professional guidance when needed, but also learned a lot by observing how natural bonds formed between people. "It's impressive," she commented to Chloe during one of the meetings. "Sometimes we achieve in one afternoon here what takes months of formal therapy to accomplish. There's something about this environment and this approach that allows people to open up in a very authentic way." "I think it's because no one here is trying to fix anyone else," replied Chloe. "We're just trying to connect as human beings who have something to offer each other." This simple, yet profound philosophy had become the heart of the Heartfelt Families Project. It was based on the belief that every person has something valuable to contribute, whether they are an abandoned child or a lonely adult, and that healing happens through genuine connection, not through technical interventions. When Chloe turned 17, she had decided she wanted to study psychology and social work at university. Her experience with the project had ignited a passion for helping children and families, and she wanted to combine that practical experience with formal academic knowledge. Thomas supported her decision completely, but he couldn't hide a certain sadness at the prospect of her going to university in the capital, which was several hours away. "I know you need to follow your dreams," he said during a conversation about her university plans. "But I'm going to miss you terribly. This house is going to be very quiet without you." "Grandpa, I'm not going to disappear," Chloe assured him. "I'll come back every weekend I can, and during holidays I'll be here helping with the project. Besides, you have a whole community of people who care about you now." It was true. Over the years, Thomas had built a network of friendships through the project that ensured he would never feel alone again. There was Arthur, Mrs. Patricia, Dr. Robert, and so many others who had become part of his extended family. Even so, the prospect of Chloe's departure marked the beginning of yet another phase of transition for both of them. It was a reminder that healthy family relationships involve learning when to hold on and when to let go, when to protect and when to allow independent growth. In the months leading up to her departure for university, Chloe worked to ensure the Heartfelt Families Project would continue running even without her constant presence. She trained some of the most dedicated volunteers to take on leadership roles and created a simple organizational system that would allow the gatherings to continue happening regularly. "The project was never about me or about you," she told Thomas during one of their planning sessions. "It was always about the community, and this community already exists and sustains itself now." The farewell party they organized for Chloe was a celebration not just of her personal journey, but of everything they had built together as a community. Over 100 people attended, including many children and families who had been impacted by the project over the years. Lily, now a confident teenager living happily with Dr. Robert and his wife, gave a moving speech during the party. "Chloe, when I was 8 years old and very scared of the future, you told me to never give up hope. That conversation changed my life. Now I want to say the same thing to all the children who are here. Never give up hope, because there are people like Chloe and Thomas in the world who believe in you even when you don't believe in yourselves." Toby, now 12 years old and thriving under the care of Mrs. Patricia, also wanted to speak. "When I first arrived here, I was a very angry kid, mad at everything and everyone. Chloe never tried to force me to be different. She just showed me that there are good people in the world, and that helped me want to be a good person too. Each testimony was a confirmation of the lasting impact that Chloe had made, not only through her direct actions, but through the example of how to transform difficult experiences into strength to help others. When it was her turn to speak, Chloe was visibly emotional. When I was a 10-year-old girl walking alone down that country road, I couldn't imagine that someday I'd be here, surrounded by so many people who care about me, she began. But what moves me most isn't what I received, but what we've managed to give to each other, she continued. Every person here proves that there are no lost causes, no hopeless situations, and no people who don't deserve love. We all had some kind of void in our lives, and we found healing by helping to fill each other's voids. The party lasted late into the night, with people sharing stories, making plans for the future, and reaffirming mutual commitments of care and support. When everyone finally said their goodbyes, and only Thomas, Chloe, and Buddy remained in the cabin, there was a moment of contemplative silence, similar to the one they had shared years before. "You know, don't you," said Thomas, breaking the silence, "that no matter where you go or what you do in life, you'll always have a place here. This will always be your home." "I know," replied Chloe, resting her head on his shoulder once more, "and you know that you'll always be the most important person in my life, no matter how many other people I meet along the way." Buddy, now an elderly but still loyal dog, settled between them with a contented sigh, as if understanding this was a special moment that deserved his presence. The following week, when the time for the actual departure came, Thomas insisted on driving Chloe to the university to help her settle into the dorm. It was a 4-hour car ride, and they spent the time talking about plans, worries, and reminiscing about favorite moments from the last 7 years. "Remember when you found me drinking water from that well?" said Chloe, laughing during the trip. "I was so scared, but trying to look brave." "And remember when you asked me if I was sure I wanted you to stay?" replied Thomas, "as if I could have any doubt after waiting so long to find you." The university dorm was simple but clean, and Chloe seemed excited about the prospect of starting this new phase of life. Thomas helped her organize her things, met her roommate, and even chatted with some other freshmen's parents. "She seems like a very special girl," commented one mother after speaking briefly with Chloe. "You did an excellent job raising her." "Actually, I think we raised each other," replied Thomas honestly. When it was time to say goodbye, they were both emotional but optimistic. They knew this physical separation wouldn't change the strength of the bond they had built. "I love you, Grandpa," said Chloe, hugging him tightly. "I love you too, my granddaughter. Now go out there and change the world." The drive back home was quiet and reflective for Thomas. He thought about how his life had completely changed in the last 7 years, and how it was strange but rewarding to see Chloe embarking on her own journey of self-discovery. When he arrived home and was greeted by Buddy at the door, he realized the house truly did feel quieter without Chloe. But it didn't feel empty. It was full of good memories and the certainty that she would return. In the following months, Thomas kept busy with the Heartfelt Families project, which continued to thrive even without Chloe's constant presence. He discovered he was becoming a kind of patriarch in the community, someone people sought for advice about family and relationships. Chloe kept her promise to return regularly. Every Friday evening, she would take the bus from the university and spend the weekend at home, helping with the project meetings and catching Thomas up on her studies. "College is confirming everything I learned from you all," she said during one of her visits, "but it's also giving me the technical words to explain why the things we do work." She was excelling in her studies, especially in subjects related to child psychology and family therapy. Her teachers often praised her intuitive understanding of complex family dynamics and her ability to connect theory with real-world practice. At the end of Chloe's first year of college, she brought news that surprised Thomas. "Grandpa, I want to write my senior thesis on the Heartfelt Families project," she announced during dinner. "My teachers think what we do here could be a model for other communities." The idea of formally documenting their work for academic purposes was something that had never occurred to Thomas, but he was intrigued by the possibility. "Do you think our little operation really has scientific value?" "Grandpa, You all are doing things that professional social workers take years to achieve, explained Chloe. And you're doing it in a way that's replicable and sustainable. It definitely has scientific value. In the following months, Chloe began systematically documenting the project's success stories, conducting interviews with families who had been helped, and analyzing the factors that contributed to successful matches between children and foster families. The research process revealed some interesting patterns. The most lasting connections tended to happen when there was a genuine mutual need, not just children needing adults, but adults who also needed purpose and connection. The matches worked best when they developed organically over time, rather than being forced or artificially arranged. Most importantly, the research showed that the informal, non-judgmental environment of the meetings allowed people who would normally be considered unsuitable by official standards to reveal themselves as exceptional caregivers. Mrs. Patricia would never have been able to adopt Toby through official channels because of her age, observed Chloe, but she proved to be exactly what he needed. Chloe's thesis was completed with honors and caught the attention of several professionals in the field of social services. She was invited to present her work at regional conferences and began receiving inquiries from other communities interested in implementing similar projects. But even with all this academic recognition, Chloe never lost sight of what really mattered, the real people whose lives had been touched by the project. The numbers and statistics are important to convince other people to try this, she told Thomas, but what really matters are the individual stories of people who found their families. After graduating with honors in psychology, Chloe made a decision that surprised many of her teachers. She decided to return home and work on expanding the Heartfelt Families project instead of immediately pursuing graduate studies or seeking employment at established institutions. I can do graduate school later, she explained, but right now there's a real opportunity to expand this work and impact more lives. I can't miss this chance. With her diploma and the academic recognition her work had received, Chloe managed to secure some partnerships with local government organizations and private foundations interested in funding innovative family support projects. This allowed them to significantly expand the project's reach. They managed to buy the property where the cabin stood, officially turning it into the initiative's headquarters. They built better facilities for the meetings, created a small library specialized in family resources, and even opened a training program for volunteers. "Look how far we've come," said Thomas to Chloe during the ceremony to inaugurate the new facilities. It all started with a lost girl and a remorseful grandfather finding each other by chance in an old cabin. "It wasn't by chance," corrected Chloe, smiling. "You actively looked for me, remember? And I had the courage to accept your help. There's nothing accidental about that." The inauguration ceremony attracted over 200 people, including many local authorities, who now recognized the project as a model for effective community work. But the most special moments were when some of the first families that had formed through the project shared their stories. Lily, now 18 and preparing to enter university, spoke about how her experience of finding a family through the project had inspired her decision to study social work. "Chloe and Thomas showed me that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most powerful," she told the audience. "They simply created a space where people who care about each other can meet. It seems so simple, but it changed hundreds of lives." Toby, now 15 and an articulate, confident young man, also wanted to speak. "When I arrived here 6 years ago, I was a very angry boy who didn't trust anyone. Mrs. Patricia taught me there's a difference between being strong and being hard, and that it's possible to be brave and kind at the same time. Now I want to use what I learned to help other kids like me." Each testimony was a powerful reminder of why the work they did mattered. They weren't just statistics or case studies. They were real lives that had been transformed through genuine human connections. After the ceremony, when most guests had already left, Thomas and Chloe found themselves once again on the porch of the original cabin, now restored and preserved as a memorial to the beginning of their journey. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself to believe all this is real," confessed Thomas. 7 years ago, I was just a lonely old man tormented by guilt. Now you're the patriarch of a family that has hundreds of people," completed Chloe. "And I'm the girl who thought she would never belong anywhere, but ended up helping hundreds of other people find their place in the world. The silence that followed was comfortable and reflective. Buddy, now 8 years old, and moving more slowly but still loyal, settled at their feet with a satisfied sigh. "What do you think comes next?" asked Thomas. "More of the same, I hope," replied Chloe. "More families forming, more children finding safety, more adults discovering they have love to give. The basic work never changes, even when it grows. And are you happy doing this? You don't regret giving up other opportunities?" Chloe thought for a moment before answering. "Grandpa, I spent the first 10 years of my life feeling like I had no place in the world. The last 10 years I spent not only finding my place, but helping other people find theirs. How could I regret that?" Her answer touched Thomas deeply. He realized that Chloe had found not only a family, but also a life purpose that was perfectly aligned with who she was as a person. "I am very proud of you," he said simply, "not only for your achievements, but for the person you have become." "And I am very grateful that you never gave up looking for me," she replied, "for believing it was worth trying even after so much time." When the first stars began to appear in the sky, they remained seated in comfortable silence, each lost in their own reflections on the extraordinary path that had led them to that moment. The old cabin that once represented abandonment and loneliness was now at the center of a thriving community of mutual care. The lost girl had become a leader in her field. The man tormented by guilt had found redemption through service to others. But more important than any of these individual transformations was what they had created together, a living proof that love, patience, and second chances can transform not just 2 lives, but an entire community. As they watched the city lights twinkle in the distance, they both knew their story was far from over. There were more children to help, more families to form, more lives to touch, and they would do it all together, as they had since that first day in the cabin when 2 lost souls found each other and decided to build something beautiful from their shared wounds. End of story. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought. Do you believe Chloe made the right decision to return and expand the project instead of pursuing other opportunities? Share your opinion on the importance of second chances and how families can be formed by love, not just by blood. Leave your like if this story moved you and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heart-touching stories.